Hello, everyone, and welcome to EyeSee's webinar powered by Quirk's Media. Thanks to Quirk's for hosting us on their platform. I'm really delighted to be hosting this session today and presenting research that will be of use to brands and retailers as they plan for SKU rationalization and shelf resets in the coming months. My name is Sanya, and I'm joined by three very experienced individuals from various parts of the consumer insights business. First up, we have Jonathan Asher, EyeSee's Executive Vice President. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Sonia. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Next, I'm pleased to introduce Gina Boyd, who is a Senior Manager, Shopper Insights and Category Management, Biscuit, at Mondelez International. Hello, and thanks for being with us today and representing your team.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
And finally, another seasoned consumer insights professional. Here with us today is Johannes Hartmann, owner of Insight Republic, a consumer-centric consultancy and the former VP at Estée Lauder and Unilever. Hello, Johannes.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for having me here.
Now, there's been much talk about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our industry. The shopping experience has changed in many profound ways, and predictions about what the future holds are being shared daily. However, we wondered what happens on the supermarket shelves in the meantime, while we wait for the new normal to come. Well, EyeSee wanted to take a more in-depth look at several possible scenarios that retailers and brands might decide to utilize when it comes to planogram efficiency. And today, we want to present the results of an extensive behavioral study on planogram optimization. So let's dive straight in. Jonathan, could you tell us more about the background and the goals of this study?
Well, during the corona pandemic, we've all seen that there's been so many kinds of changes in shopping behavior and challenges that marketers and retailers have faced. What we've heard a lot about is the challenges having to do with limitations of what can be put on the shelf. And that can be because ingredients aren't available, raw materials, limited plant capacity, or even delivery of finished product to the stores. So retailers and manufacturers are having to deal with what should they put on the shelf. There's limited options, more so than there had been before. So they have to think about what of the product line can they put on the shelf. And with that, thinking about how things should be arranged. So with resetting the shelves, there are many options, different paths you can take with how to fill the empty spaces. And having had those kinds of conversations with many clients, we thought it would be a good idea to do some new research that could help with the discussions. So we created 4 different scenarios that we would test with shoppers in a behavioral way. We looked at different categories and comparing to the baseline or the control study 3 options that would be different ways that a manufacturer or retailer could approach having fewer items to put on the shelf. The first is keeping everything the same in terms of number of facings. So there might be fewer items or fewer SKUs within a brand, but multiply the facings of what is available so that in totality it stays the same. The proportion for each brand in the shelf is the same. The other option is to give over more of the newly available space to private label. And retailers certainly would have reason to do that, to think if the top tier brand is not available, we can have more space available for our brands. And that's another option that we looked at. The fourth option was to think that the private label brands would need to be diminished, and the top tier brands would be able to have more of that newly available space. So that's the fourth option, where we increase the number of top tier facings in totality.
And what about the study design? In what way was the research conducted?
The study we conducted was pretty comprehensive. It was behavioral research, which is really important. We put respondents in front of a shelf as if they were in the store and they could shop and buy whatever they want. So it's behavioral buying, and that's very important because we have seen and done validation to show that that correlates very highly with in-market sales. So that's the premise of the study. We conducted the study among 1,200 shoppers, divided them into 4 cells. Everybody was put into one or another of those different shelves that I described and would go shopping. They went shopping from 4 different categories with that one type of shelf arrangement. They shopped from the coffee category, the ready-to-eat cereal category, chocolate, and yogurt. So all CPG, but a bit of variation in terms of the type of product. And what we learned was very interesting and somewhat surprising. On average, from the control shelves, people would spend just about $9 per person on average. When we look at reducing the number of items, so the facings stay the same for the top tier brands, but if there aren't as many different options or not as many choices for the shopper, the amount of money they spend declines by 5%. And that might be a little surprising. There's been a lot of attention paid to things like the paradox of choice, that people are overwhelmed when there are too many choices. But this is an indication that people do still want choices and they spend more money when they're given more choices. But let's look at the other 2 options. If we allocate those newly available parts of the shelf to private label offerings, we see the same decline of about 5% in how much money people spend. But alternatively, if we increase the number of top tier facings, we see a 2% increase in how much money they spend relative to the control. And in fact, it's a 7% shift versus the other 2 options in totality. And what's very interesting is you can imagine that given the opportunity to allocate more of this newly found space to their own brands, retailers might jump on the chance to do that. But these findings suggest that they may not want to do that, given that it will reduce register rings.
And finally, what do these findings mean for brands and retailers? What's the impact of this?
Well, we all know that the amount of shelf space that's available for a category tends to be a zero-sum game. If something is added, something else has to be taken away. So in terms of space, it's a zero-sum game. We know that. But what we've seen is how we use that space and what the outcome might be can be very different. And we can control that or at least influence it. And if we want to determine the best way to influence the options that may be available, we should be using behavioral research. So research is great, but for something like this, behavioral research is really the way to go. Put people in a situation where they're doing actual shopping and see how they respond. That's so much better, so much more predictive than if you simply describe a situation to a respondent and let them tell you what they think they might do in that situation. And what we've seen is the research that we did gave us some very interesting findings, but it's just limited hypothetical possibilities that we were testing. But even with those, we got some very meaningful shifts in behavior, and some of it was very unexpected. So we would hope this would be the starting point for discussions and thinking and planning as manufacturers and retailers face this situation in the real world. Because knowing what results you might get with making these changes ahead of time will allow for smart planning and ultimately more profitable outcomes.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Now, let's talk to Gina for a second. Gina, manufacturers and retailers, as we just saw, are facing growing pressures, but also opportunities to manage their shelves by rationalizing SKUs, adjusting assortments, and resetting their planograms. How do you expect the ongoing crisis to affect brands?
That's a really great question. So the results of the case study that were conducted really reiterate the importance of assortment and variety within top tier brands. As retailers and shoppers continue their movement towards more value-focused brands, including private label, there's an opportunity to ensure national brands maintain their share of assortment and space to deliver on shopper expectations of quality and variety. Brands have continued to be seen as nostalgic and a lifestyle connection, and they can use this to satisfy both their emotional and physical well-being. Retailers need to ensure that availability and assortment are on point to delivering the best experience. When brands are not available, not all shoppers will make the switch to private label or other brands. Some will delay or switch their purchase to another store. Using SKU rationalization tools and proper need state analysis will help retailers make the best decisions in order to maximize space, profitability, and shopper satisfaction.
As we have seen this in many studies before, when placed in a shopping context, such as a 3D store, for example, and confronted with alternative scenarios, behaviors will often shift and sometimes in quite unexpected ways. So, what approaches in testing planograms do you personally most rely on and why?
The two approaches in testing planograms that our team relies on the most are virtual tests and in-store tests. Virtual tests are great because they allow us to test a variety of scenarios while also measuring key indicators such as shoppability, findability, purchase intent, etc. They also allow for consistency in approach and questions so that we get a certain confidence level in results. In-store tests are fantastic when you have a great collaborative retail partner. I think there is a unique element of real-life, genuine shopping going on. Shoppers are just behaving as they normally would, unaware that a test is even being conducted. However, if the retail partner has their own testing department, you may be limited in inputs and final interpretation. So this is where strong retailer partnerships and a collaborative approach are critical so we can inform the test during development and then activate against the results.
And what do you believe is the best approach for marketing and insights leaders to ensure they stay on top during and after the COVID crisis?
As shoppers continue to shop and spend more in stores during COVID-19 due to shifting from out-of-home eating occasions, it's imperative that manufacturers do a few things. First, listen and observe. Do not make assumptions about your consumers or your shoppers based on what you've known in the past. Monitor shopper trends by keeping a pulse on regular shopper metrics and behavior changes that may be a result of a second wave or governmental laws, new path to purchase, things like that. Secondly, maintain trust. In this time of uncertainty, we have heard from shoppers that they are willing to pay more for brands they trust to be safe for their families. This also lowers the risk of purchasing something new and not having it meet expectations when finances may be a key concern. Also, while shoppers may be willing to pay more for brands they trust, innovating in the appropriate attributes can help justify their higher price tag. Not all shoppers feel name brands are worth the price, but unique attributes they elevate for name brands over private label include variety, quality, taste, ingredients, and elevated packaging. Ensure new products improve on these attributes because that will be key to incrementality. Also, tailoring brand messaging to call out unique benefits of name brands is important. Things like nostalgia, quality, innovation, unique causes. This will allow shoppers to differentiate between brands in their mind. And lastly, deliver on product availability and shipments as they risk losing shoppers to competitive brands or losing a sale completely. Many retailers will fill in the space with other vendors who can commit to fulfilling the unit volume necessary in a given week.
Thank you, Gina. This was very informative. And I really feel these statements and tips can also be used and understood in a broader context. So let's move away from tactical to strategy for a second. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there is a game of prediction going on in the world of consumer research. And some of these claims are quite confident, even though we're not at all sure of what the future brings. In our last webinar session, which was called CPG Shopping Post-COVID, what will the new normal really look like? We discussed several trends that seem to contradict each other. For example, we want to indulge in comfort foods and reward ourselves for the challenges that we went through. But at the same time, we want to eat foods that are better for us and our future health. Consumers are flocking to use online options for their grocery shopping, but on the other hand, they crave human contact and a sense of normalcy that brick-and-mortar shopping provides. We reach for familiar and established brands, but we also want to try something new and get excited with innovative products at home. So this list of extremes goes on and on. There's so many more examples. So I would like to take a step back in this next section to talk about how the changes that we see on the planogram level are also reflected in the broader shopping experience and research during COVID. I feel that there is an underlying need for a deeper understanding of consumers precisely at this moment. Now, our final section, we're going to talk to Johannes. What do you believe is the best approach for marketing and insights leaders during and after the COVID crisis? How should they listen and observe, like Gina just mentioned?
I have, of course, for all of us, even independently from our professional background, I think we all recognize that COVID is not necessarily only an economical crisis, but it is first and foremost also a human crisis, I think, which all of us have been confronted with in more or less bigger kind of settings, like taking care of your kids suddenly at home every day, or being on your own and reflecting on your life, that was something that you might have not done for quite a while. So in a way, COVID affects all of us in a way that it makes us think about our own reality. It makes the line between business and consumers really thinner, in that sense that suddenly we are all in the same boat, and brands need to indeed to recognize that the human aspects and the interaction aspects that they bring forward has become far more important than it has been in the past. So the first thing is really to recognize the human context of everything that we're doing. Data will be important, and you will see through all the section that we are going through here, I will reconfirm that data is key, that going further along the digital path is key, but equally it is becoming more key to overcome all the barriers that this new environment is delivering in order to see in the soul and hearts of our consumers. So when you look at the tragedy or the crisis that we are currently faced with, you can already imagine what people are looking for, more or less. They're looking for reconfirmation, they're looking for safety, they're looking for protection, they're looking for aspects that gives them more hope into the future and that things will go back to normal, whatever normal is. I mean, I feel very normal now, so for me there's no new normal and old normal. It is that we as humans are confronted with change and we have to adapt to it. And what we are currently facing is for sure a very strong and very heavy crisis. But equally, our ancestors and our generations before us overcame these kind of moments in humanity, and they have made us better, they have made people better, and I think it can make businesses better.
Thank you, Johannes. I think also that this is a very humbling experience in a way, and if this doesn't allow for businesses to be more and more human-centric, I don't know what else will. I think this is really a great opportunity to connect in a better way with consumers. And so you have a really broad experience. So I would like to ask you, as a former VP of Insights at Estée Lauder and Unilever, how do you think COVID would influence the research strategy of your department in those previous roles?
I think it is first and foremost a very good opportunity for all companies to have a reason to reduce research budgets in order to make the numbers. And I'm very sure that this is a prospect that everybody is currently facing in these departments. So you have less money, but at the same time you have increased needs to face the challenges that COVID and the related answers that you need to give to the business are giving to you. So As a consequence, I think the pressures on inside departments is increasing from a monetary perspective, but then at the same time also from the need to bring the human aspect into the business. And that, for me, actually bears two big kind of struggles and big kind of fights. So the first one is, how do you convince an organization to balance the existing budget between quick and dirty fixes and really kind of deep understanding of your consumers? And how do you make sure that adequate methodologies and approaches are utilized? The digital aspect to that one is we cannot avoid it. But then the question needs to be answered, how do we really make effectively and efficiently use of the digital context to work via the computer with consumers and listening to them face to face? And how do we overcome all the barriers that are related to that? That is number one. Number two, we also have obviously an facilitation kind of objective within companies, so to drive insight into action. And although we have all these nice tools like Zoom and Teams and what have you, but rather than that they really offer a good opportunity to emotionally connect, we see ourselves being confronted with a lot of barriers that these tools are actually offering to us in convincing people, in interacting with people, and really indeed coming to a point that you have a genuine conversation. And that for me requires the most attention at this point of time, because I see that it gives us the illusion, these kind of tools, that we are becoming more productive with having a Zoom or any kind of these kind of conversations. But at the same time, the illusion of productivity very often puts a layer on the fact that our communication is often not truthful and honest and direct. And that needs to become part of the way we are going forward. Also, it eats much more energy, by the way, than a face-to-face conversation sometimes brings forward. So that is my experience. You might have other experiences, but I think that the digital context is nice for giving you a productivity illusion, but is it really in that sense kind of rigorous and direct and than a face-to-face or a direct conversation in an office with people?
Yes, it's definitely a challenge, and especially when it comes to this choosing of methodologies, I think it's also a good time to reevaluate very carefully what works and what doesn't, and what new things we might introduce in which ways. But also, how do you expect the COVID crisis will speed up or cause revolutions in market research in this case?
I think the revolution, has to happen in the way how we are utilizing the digital context and the data-driven context in the way that we are not losing the human aspect and the human context to the way we interpret data. And that is an art and a science. And I think the science can be, that is going to be tackled, but at the same time also to maintain the sensitivity and the empathy in interpreting data in that regard. That is something that I increasingly feel becomes a barrier from my experience with clients, my experience with research, my experience with moderators. Too easily we fall into the gap of interrogation in order to create data, and we very easily lose the opportunity to just create a one-on-one relationship, like friends would talk with each other, or a friend of a friend would talk with each other. And with that, actually, losing an aspect that makes our data really relevant for business. And that is, I think, something we need to further educate and learn. And that is a huge opportunity, I think, for all the digital developments to maintain a human-centric component.
So I would just like to make a slight remark here. I think what you're talking about is amazing in terms of human-to-human interaction within market research, but the same principle of making it natural and making it believable and lifelike is something that we also use as a guidance when we develop our tools. They are digital, but they're recreating contexts in which other normal human behaviors are happening, and using it in research, such as scrolling through social media or e-commerce purchases. And so we are also very aware of this need to make it more lifelike and more human centered.
Well, and that's why I think I'm applauding you utilizing these kind of tools. But how many times did we see an interpretation of social media data that is really quite literal and quite number driven, rather really looking at the essence and the interpretive kind of components, looking into that data, and also searching for the broader context to have the right lens on the data.
Yeah, definitely. There needs to be another layer on top of the data, which turns it into valuable insights and not just first level interpretation in a way.
Exactly.
And when it comes to trends, there's been a lot of talk about trends lately and the new normals and what's going to happen. And what do you think are some of the less obvious or conflicting trends that we're seeing emerge in shopper or consumer behavior?
Well, I think there are some obvious trends, and I think they are going to be accelerated by the dynamics of COVID. One of my biggest observation, and that is because my clients are very much in this area, it is about food and about how we are changing our diet in order to create a better and bigger environment around us. What I see in some of the geographies is that the awareness and the accountability of the individual for the rest of the world is just accelerating by COVID. I think that COVID is giving this kind of bit of a push, this kind of bit of an awareness that makes people much more think about their own lives and how it affects others, and how that has an effect on our daily behavior, be it on how we eat, be it on how we consume, be it on how we travel, be it on how we interact with each other through digital. And that is, I think, something that is really profound. I think that what always was pretended as to be a kind of almost through Greta and what always kind of a fad kind of development, I see in research really arriving at the hearts and souls of people. And it's becoming a kind of that is really becoming a new normal, that people just don't want to live on the cost of other people anymore. And the real kind of surprise to me is how deeply that is already arrived as a kind of a mainstream behavior in many Western geographies.
I guess some trends that were on the margins were being pushed into the spotlight and into the mainstream much faster than they would have been if it weren't for this crisis. Okay, and when it comes to the role of market research specifically, how can you help manufacturers and retailers face the growing pressures and seize the opportunities, so not just battle with the crisis, but also make something better out of it?
Yeah, I think that, and it is a question of choice at the end of the day. I think if you're working in a consumer research or market research department, it is absolutely a mandate to keep representing what is really influencing human behavior and how that impacts the business, and not just escaping in data and trying to make data the holy grail of the conversation. Again, and I want to be really understood properly here, of course, data, new ways of working, new methodologies, that is also relevant. However, I see in the tendency that the human aspects actually is coming as a kind of a surrogate or as a kind of a last element into the conversation why it shouldn't. So when you as a market researcher want to have an impact, you ideally combine the soft data and the hard data with each other. And I've seen now in various kind of conversations with retailer that they want to understand the human aspects. However, they don't want it to become a theoretical kind of exercise. So it doesn't need to create kind of an university conversation, but it has to become simple, direct, understandable, and also in a way resonating that it actually, and the retailer are also human beings, that it is recognizable also for these kind of people in order to understand what kind of things they need to do about it. Now, I think that we as a consumer researcher need to maintain that role, should not escape from it, and just become smarter in the way we relate it at these kind of times with COVID, in a very succinct, very pragmatic, very practical way with retailers and manufacturers.
Yes, and also in a way building trust with them as well, and not in this kind of, I would say that trust and honesty are the key words in all of these relationships when we're in a crisis mode. And how important would you say is contextual testing, especially when it comes to planograms, packaging, and other in-store marketing?
I'm always thinking the song of context research. I think there shouldn't be anything but context research, because you only understand consumer in context. So when you really want to understand how our brain works, it is that we know exactly the difference, how to behave differently during a funeral or during a wedding situation, and we know exactly indeed how to adjust to those kind of moments if we are sane human beings. So yeah, I'm a big believer in context research, and the more we are able to simulate true human context through digital and understanding humans in that context, the more accurate and the better the results are going to be. And I'm very sure that innovation is going to happen in that regard. So there will be more 3D testing, there will be more kind of simulation testing, there will be more kind of an attempt to really replicate people's world in a digital environment, so to understand behavior, attitudes, and related preferences in a way that is natural to the human aspect. And then our data is automatically becoming better.
Yes, fully agreed. Thank you so much, Johannes, for all of your insights. I think this was a very, very lovely conversation.
Good, Sandra. I hope it was.
And Jonathan, do you perhaps have any remarks or key takeaways that you want to share?
Yes, so I just want to say thanks to both Johannes and Gina for spending the time with us today, sharing their thoughts about this important topic. Hopefully, everyone found it useful and of interest, and the information we provided can at least start some conversations and even better help drive some effective business decisions going forward. So thanks again.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thanks to all three of you and everyone who tuned in today for this webinar session. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to type them out in a chat box. We'll be hanging around here and we can respond to those, or otherwise you can just send us an email and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks again, stay safe, and until next time.